All right. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. And today we are joined by someone who I've been secretly stalking and secretly a big fan of, and now I get to meet him and to chat to him. So it's a big moment for me, and we'll get Zach to introduce himself in a moment. But let me just do the normal kind of sharing screen and get the slides up, and then we will get cracking. So I think that's pretty much us done. So yeah, here we go. So you've already seen, and you probably already know him from his book and his work on on education rickshaw. And so we're delighted to have you here, Zach. How do you pronounce your last name?
Groshell. Yeah, Zach Groshell.
Is there like an exotic, origin of that?
It's exotic as the American story in that
Okay.
in that probably some Jewish immigrants got their name changed from Czechoslovakia or Germany, and it just kind of got messed up that way.
I love it. I love it. Well, but the next slide, we'll get into it in a bit more detail. And so, yeah, obviously, you're a director of your own company, I guess now. And so let's jump straight into that and sort of talk a little bit about kind of what is your role at the moment.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting in that right now I'm living the best life. I'm having a really great time, but it's not. I feel great I can talk about this stuff with you right now because it's really something nobody gets to chat with me about this. It's not something anybody wants to hear is the trials of the consultant, but basically most of the time I'm being hired independently by schools who just read the book, listened to the podcast, and they want me to come talk to their teachers. They want me to lead their principals around. Maybe their principals don't really know much about instruction, and they're good guys, but they don't have a vision for teaching, and the superintendent or whoever does. And it's time to calibrate. It's time to coordinate some ideas around the science of learning, or maybe more specifically, emphasis on explicit instruction.
Nice.
And that occupies most of my time, but it's just really smart if you're thinking of ever going this route to always keep other projects going. I wouldn't even call Step Lab a small project. I'd call it a
Sure.
major, huge part of project, right? Which is that I'm also the director of Step Lab North America. And also, like, I do little things here and there. I've got to do that in order to learn new things, meet new people. And let's say someday this consulting thing just the thirst for it goes down. I've got all these different networks and people is what I hope
Yeah.
this is doing.
Hilarious. That's so funny because, of course, most of the listeners probably are UK based, and that idea of, oh, I might say, oh, I run Step Lab for the Southwest, and that's like a half of a US state, maybe, and you're just in charge of Step Lab for the whole of North America. So yeah, no, no pressure.
And originally too, it was like I think it was similar to Ollie Level in Australia.
Right,
It was
of
like
course.
Ollie's like, I want New Zealand, I was like, I want Canada. It was sort of one of those things.
Yeah, I might get on the phone to Josh and see who I can get. Maybe, the Maldives. Can I do Step Lab
Yeah.
Maldives, please? So why the move into this? I guess you were a classroom teacher before?
I was a classroom teacher. I always, because I did some international school teaching, and COVID was in the middle of it, and I did a PhD out of fun. I just did a lot of different things. So classroom teaching is not it was very much classroom teaching for a good 10 years, but it was sort of back and forth. I always tell people it doesn't have to be you were an instructional coach for 5 years straight, then you became a principal. I was the director of educational technology during COVID. I was half-time instructional coach. I was full-time instructional coach. I was an interventionist. So for about 14 years, and now I can safely say I'm not in a classroom or in a
Yeah.
building at all. So
Yeah. That's great. And I guess there was a desire to widen the impact, was it? That was the kind of.
yeah, I mean, I wanted I want to change the world. That's just like the bottom line. A lot of what I'm doing in terms of the consulting too is with that lens. Like I don't want to do a keynote at your school on the first day of inset and then fly back and then what is that going to do, right? I want to partner with you for in the long term. If
Yeah,
that
yeah.
means if that means a lower rate overall in order to come back multiple times, I want to stay and I want to get my hands dirty. I want to talk to the principals. I want to get in the classrooms, and I want you
Love it.
to. That's very different. I feel like than maybe if you didn't have that idea. Is like I want to make an impact on this school that I wouldn't have possibly been able to as a fourth grade teacher, as a first grade
Yeah.
teacher. You know.
That's so great, isn't it? And I have, little, I mean, I hope it didn't come too soon, but I have daydreams about, like the last moments of my life and that idea of if I can sit back and think, yeah, I think it was worth me being here. I think I had an impact, I think I'll go fairly peacefully.
And you have to pair with leaders who understand that. Like I just released my podcast with Lynn Gaffney's one of the superintendents who I worked with. I mean, she texts me like she texts me a bunch of pictures of knowledge organizers she just like found in different rooms and stuff. She's like, when you mentioned that, when you talked about that once, people
Yeah,
printed up, people made them. You know what I mean? And it's like, you see that and you're like, I did that, and it wasn't just a consulting fun song and dance thing. It was like teachers understood a principle that could be integrated, and it's here in this picture on my phone as a tool, and who knows what's going to happen, but something's happening.
yeah.
There's some, you know what I mean? That to me is very important.
Really interesting. And but before we get into the next bit, I thought there's a lesson there as well that I guess both of us would like to, probably like to communicate to teachers that although our impact is maybe in a spotlight, if you're a classroom teacher, you should never forget, the tiny impacts that you're having that cumulatively are really changing, kids' lives and stuff. So that's fascinating. Well, we've talked a little bit about how your week works, so let's crack into this thing. And if you're new to the podcast, we have a fairly kind of standard structure, which Zach is kind of before coming on today chosen a few things that he wants to talk about, some questions that he wants to answer, and then we're going to unpick a couple of the launch pads that have resonated with him. And so if we get started with this, the first kind of fast friends question that Zach chose was this. And tell us a bit about what you're grateful for then, Zach.
Yeah. I mean, I I have a really great life. I really do. I have amazing family members. I think I want to focus it on my mom for this question, who she just retired after 41 years of teaching preschool,
Wow.
teaching a deaf preschool because she herself is deaf, and she
Okay.
comes from a rural town called Brookings, Oregon, which is bigger now. It's sort of a tourist town now, but it used to be teeny and like a mill, a wood mill town, and
Okay.
they didn't know what to do with a deaf kid, right? They're just like at first they're like she's probably just not very intelligent and didn't even
Right.
understand what was happening, and then as they got older, they just kind of sat her in the back and gave her books, right? And just said, "Hey, teach yourself to read, and teachers, we can't teach you, right?" And
Yeah.
through, but after all of that, she became the first person in her family to graduate college. She got a
Oh,
master's degree, and she taught,
amazing.
an academic preschool, like an actual, like a real, not a daycare, a school that is to teach children how to sign from families that also had kids that they didn't know what to do with, and when they appeared when they're 3 years old they didn't have any semblance of language, so
Yeah.
she was the first person to give
Oh my
give them
goodness.
those tools. So this is my origin story, is I have a great teacher as a mom, a
As a mum.
largely, I have a dad, but largely raised by my mom, and
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
God. And I was, we're not talking about this today, but I was doing a new launch pad for next year's book about this thing called latent learning. And this idea that sometimes we don't realize we're learning until later on we see the outcome of that. I think that's massive in parenthood, isn't it? That you don't realize that you're being shaped by the models that are in front of you. Yeah, that's great. How interesting. Amazing. Well, the next bit for people that are, again, not familiar, is we talk about this idea of what I've called ignition points. And this leans into this idea that however successful you might think somebody is, or you see, what they do, like, online or whatever, there's a story behind that. And for most of us, there have been pivotal moments in our lives that have created some sort of transformation. And so, guests on the podcast get a chance to tell us a little bit about some of those, where potentially that, has led to something positive. So, Zach's chosen two of these. And so the first one, tell us a bit about what were you like before the ignition point, what happened, and then how are you different afterwards?
Love it. And by the way, I love your use of dual coding theory on this podcast. You really do have to pay attention as a guest to like what the person is saying, and some people write down notes, but I'm zeroing in on everything the host says because I have to answer them and create an order in my list. And look what you've done here. You've scaffolded it for me. This is great. So, different ignition points. I'm let's talk about summer camp, because that was something that you and I think it's an experience we shared. Um, I I was one of those people, by the way, that sort of I just said this wonderful story about my mom, but I would always tell my mom like, ugh. I would never be a teacher, right? I'd never be a teacher. Like what those kids, and just kind of thinking it was a low status type of career and so on. And one of the things that I did do throughout my life was just go to summer camp once a summer. I never really thanked anyone for it. I just thought it was just a gift that I didn't even think of it as a gift. I was like a right of being a kid, I'd go to summer camp, and it really was life changing. It was an opportunity to face the fact that, socially, I might be an awkward person. I have to make friends immediately in 1 week. And how do you do that? Every year was a different way of doing that, right? Oh, suddenly I'm really good at this, and now everybody likes me about that. Or next year that didn't work out, right? I need to show them something else. And
Yeah.
when I got to college, it was just obvious thing is like, I wonder if my old summer camp, who's now changed leadership and it's all different now, I wonder if they'd be interested in me doing it. And I did that for many years. I would say so many years that I wouldn't even say I'm quite fully divorced from that camp. I just last summer did some stuff for them, right?
Yeah.
I wonder from your perspective, because you did summer camp, is the American summer camp that's in the movies and the dream, is it how you pictured it? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. And it's fascinating. I mean, my link to summer camp is a bit like yourselves, really, that never thought I wanted to be a teacher, drifted through school, and then got invited to go to an American summer camp, had illusions of going to a co-ed water sports camp in LA, and then got an all-boys science camp in Pennsylvania, which, I was less than excited about before I got there. And then it just was, like you suggested, it for me, and I think it was partly because of the time. That was 20 years ago, so it was partly because of the economic situation and all these sorts of things. But it was as romantic as I thought it was going to be, and when I look back on it now, and again, I'm not divorced from it. I can't. My best friends are still from that camp, and we talk about those times fondly. And that, when you describe your days, I'd wake up, I'd go and do flagpole, I'd have breakfast, I'd do a bit of climbing instruction, I might do a bit of water sports instruction in the sun, all these things. So for me, it was an incredible experience in a very formative time of my life. And yeah, I mean, I would put camp as an ignition point for me as well.
I like to make connections in my mind between education and
Mhm.
camp, and I think the strongest one is around ritual.
Right.
That you just named. Like I go to flagpole, right?
Yeah.
I'm down, and you talk to kids who, especially like I started doing the staff training, and all of a sudden
Right.
these are kids now to me, right? These are
Yeah.
17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and that was me at some
Yeah.
point in time. And now I'm calling them children. I'm calling them
Right.
kids, right? And I've got to teach you like what I know about this place. and
Yeah.
pass down these traditions. And that's really what they all talk about. They talk about, like, that one time they were hanging around the flagpole
Yeah.
and this thing happened, or they were all standing up and we're chanting together, and we're singing together, and something happened that was just so funny and crazy. And these are experiences that schools, I think the top schools, they intuitively understood. Someone in the leadership, maybe it was their religious background, maybe it
Yeah.
was their summer camp background, but it's not about necessarily a higher power. It's about the collective and
Yeah.
all of us doing things together and rowing the boat together.
Yeah.
That just schools could tap into this if they weren't. Some of them are just so. What is the
Like,
word? They're just
I don't know, like,
they don't have that authenticity. They don't have
no.
that flavor and that heart that
Yeah.
summer camp does. And
That's so fascinating. And I think you're right. And of course, we're hoping that, this is a podcast for leaders. And I guess the message there is, have a look at the rituals that you've got. And I don't know if you're the same way, Zach, but if you don't have rituals or you don't have the right rituals, go make some,
yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And in American schools, a lot of times there is something around sports, but I feel like that's just not enough, because school is not sports.
No.
Okay, we have to learn stuff. How do we create this around the things that the kids do every day? The academics, the achievement, the learning. That's the goal, right? Some schools get it right, but it only from 3 o'clock to 5 o'clock they get it right. They don't get it
Yeah.
right for what the kids go through every day in math and science and so
No.
on.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And, I sometimes talk about that idea that, what we reward, we reinforce, you know. And if all the rituals are just, sports related, then that's kind of what you're reinforcing as what you value, or, yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Okay, well, let's get cracking into one of these launch pads then. So, as I said, Zach is got his copy of the book, had a look through, and he's kind of chosen firstly this one around designing purposeful presentations. And so I'm going to kind of unpick that a little bit about where it came from in my mind when I made it, and then we're just going to ask Zach kind of why it resonated with him, and whether he can add anything to it. And so this launchpad's called Designing Purposeful Presentations. And when I wrote it, I thought, the presentations where I really prepare and plan naturally go better than the ones that I don't. And I might pull off a fluke every now and again, but I very early learned that, prep time is super important. And so the things that jump to me when I'm planning a presentation are things like, I need to tailor for the audience. I need to leverage what we call the primacy effect. I need to purposefully add what I would call flavor. And then I need to do the opposite to the primacy, really, and finish really strong with this recency effect. And we'll go into those in a bit more detail. But if we focus just in on this idea of, thinking about your audience while you're designing, there's something about who are they, so what are their roles and what are their contexts? Because if you can build it around that and then tap into that, you'll get massive amounts of engagement. And people tend, sadly so, to come to presentations with, will this be relevant to me, already on their mind. And so you can get rid of that. I think knowing where their interests are, and if you can get a sense of their expectations, then you're much more likely to meet those expectations naturally. And then, like we would do in a classroom, really, you want to build on prior knowledge. You want to know what they already know, so that anything that you do introduce is not a big step change so far that they can't engage with it, but also be aware potentially of baggage or biases that they might be bringing. Because if you can preempt those, or have things up your sleeve to kind of deal with them, then you're better off. So that's what I was thinking with the audience. And then I thought, well, if we put the the timeline of engagement versus time, and then split the presentation into kind of like a meal like thing to kind of play with the flavor analogy, but a starter, a main, and a dessert, or start, middle, and end, whichever you want to use. This idea that potentially we are always losing engagement. So at any point we're always losing engagement, and you can't avoid that. So what you've got to try and do, I suppose, is to create peaks. You've got to purposefully create these peaks of engagement that counteract the natural kind of, and it may just be me, it may just be people are sleeping in my presentations, but who knows. But we talked about this idea of primacy, and if you haven't heard of that, there's a suggestion that we remember or we pay attention to usually the first thing that we come across. And so potentially we can leverage that by having a really strong hook or a connection to the audience. We need to make sure, in my mind, that we don't forget to introduce ourselves. And of course, there'll be other people that have different opinions about this, but hey. And then potentially an outline of what you're going to cover. And so there's something about the starter, and then this idea of maybe splitting the presentation down into smaller sections, which always start with a kind of a what and a why. So if we split it into like episodes, potentially, you start with right now we're going to talk about this, and I'm talking about this because, and then the idea is that you add some flavor. And that can be in all kinds of different ways. You can use examples, you can use stories, you can use scenarios, data, research, metaphors, quotes and questions to try and pique people's engagement and keep them kind of connected. And then, if you're seeing it as an episodic thing, then maybe summarizing and then signposting to the next episode is a smart way to kind of narrate the thread. And then to finish off this, I just started thinking, okay, well, if the primacy effect is what you remember first, then we also have this thing called the recency effect, which again is typical that people remember the last thing that happened. And so potentially we can leverage that by, checking their understanding, doing a quick recap, linking maybe to other presentations or to context, and then potentially giving them a bit of a challenge or a call to action. Sometimes goes down pretty well. And so that was kind of what I was thinking when I made the Launchpad. But I mean, how did that resonate with you, Zach?
Yeah, I mean, this is where this is where my mind often is, right? I'm sitting in this office and I'm click clacking away on PowerPoint trying to figure out like how to teach a bunch of people I've never met before. Some of the things that came up out of your discussion here that really resonated with me, like let's talk about prior knowledge. What it actually is quite a lot more difficult dealing with presenting to audiences you've never met than it is to your own class. You can mess up a couple lessons at the beginning of the year assessing and trying to figure out where they're at, and you slowly kind of get put your finger on each kid, and you got 30 different lesson plans in your mind for this kid and that, but ultimately you can learn from those experiences, and you can see patterns, right? We after, if you've taught only 5 years, you start to see this kid and that kid and this, you start to notice they're all archetypes of each other, and this is why when you do like those end of year reports, some people have a bank of comments and they just start using old ones, right? You know what they are, right? But I'm not one of those people, and I don't want to ignite this debate right now, but that thinks there's such a thing as an adult learner. I think that everybody just learns the same way, but the difference is in prior knowledge, and that the adults that we are going to present to all have such such a spread of prior knowledge that is so much greater than your students would, because of the years of experience, because of how hard they've worked to self-coach and read, and so you come into these buildings, and not only do we have differences in prior knowledge, you ask them, can I just have the math teachers? And they go, no, we got to have you teach everyone. We got one budget, right? You're like, can I just have the K through 5 teachers? No. You've got to have the whole, everybody, right? And so how do I do that? I think your starter answer is a good sort of, there's no perfect answer to this, but how do I present myself as a credible source of information? How do I put this into context saying, look, none of this I'm going to say is going to be brand new, but actually that's good instruction. 90% of this is going to be review, and 10% of this, I hope, that sweet spot is going to give you something new to work with. And I think that's going to manage your cognitive load just fine, right?
I love that.
And so, I personally don't start with what I would call a traditional icebreaker. I don't get them making rows and columns and holding hands and doing. I just talked about summer camp. We do that every time, right? No,
Yeah,
I don't. It's a different context, a
yeah, it
professional
is.
context. I've seen some really great so-called icebreakers that I think are better. I think that they connect the content really well. Like if you've known of Inner Drive, which is
Yeah,
a cognitive science company that I think is awesome with
yeah,
Bradley
yeah,
Bush and
yeah,
and Edward Watson. They did this one on modeling, which I should steal. I should ask if I can steal this idea.
yeah, yeah.
Where they basically were like, so everyone draw a panda, and everyone, of course, a panda is hard to draw. It's a four-legged
Really
animal,
hard.
right? So,
Yeah.
everyone laughs and so on. And they say, now, I want you to just follow along to draw our panda. And they populate the screen. Everyone draws a circle. Populate the
Okay.
screen. Everyone draws the ears. And then
Yeah.
they do that slowly. And they say, show your panda to each other. Great. Now, take a new piece of paper out. Draw the panda our way this time, and everybody's pandas looks all right, right? And they're like, this is the power of modeling, right? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it's like, that is a
I'm
great
in.
icebreaker,
I'm
right?
in. I'm
So
in. Sign me
I
up.
try to do simulations like that, what else? I don't want to, we could talk about this, but what
Well,
other areas do you want to, are you thinking about?
yeah, I mean, I think that's probably enough for now around this one because I'm keen to kind of, one of the purposes of the podcast is to get a bit more into your story and to kind of, lean away from the theory too much. But interestingly, Brad's episode is launching on Friday this week, actually. So
Nice,
on
nice.
his birthday. So we'll pretend that was pre-planned.
Yeah.
So yeah, so again, we're now going to jump into what was the second fast friend question that Zach chose, and this is about his most treasured memory. So tell us about that.
Yeah. Huh. I know I picked the question. Now I got to pick the memory, right?
Wow.
um, I mean, uh, I have a lot of really great memories in the classroom where I felt like I did the job justice. I always tell this story on when I'm talking about cognitive load of a student who I change her name every time. Let's call her Annabelle, right? Where she where the principal came to me and was like, number one, I never meet with teachers in this kind of capacity, and I
Yeah.
almost feel like it's inappropriate. But
Yeah.
your classroom is so structured, and we're going to get a student who has needs that we've never experienced at this private. It was a private school, so that's why,
Okay.
right? Usually you exclude children at this type of school, and I'm just not even sure if she can fit in here. And I just kind of want to do kind of a trial run, with you as the teacher kind of thing. And can we try it? Can we give it a go and sort of thing? And that was a year of how do you get everyone in the class to hold her hand, to be her friend, to to grow a lot as children, that year. And also, how do you get the academic rigor to be what the parents expect, what they deserve? And so things like changing the portfolio that they had to do at the end of the year, so that
Right.
we started much earlier and we broke it down and segmented it so everyone, and actually you get that light bulb moment that it's not slowing it down. Actually, everyone benefited from the changes in the instructional design, in the explicitness, in the right, and maybe that was one of those launch pads for me going towards a more explicit instruction type model in the first
Right.
place. Was I'm not saying prioritizing the kids on the bottom or so on, but understanding that sometimes how you teach is not harmful to anyone, but it's
Yeah.
especially beneficial for some students. So,
Yeah. That's great, and I think that's a really strong message that's coming through, certainly in the UK education scene about those things. Um, Going back to if we lean into this a bit more, have you got any kind of standout sort of memories from summer camp that you think probably will stick with you forever?
I mean, yeah,
Any?
we have these things again to rituals. We have these things at YMCA camps called rags,
Okay.
which are basically just bandanas, right,
Okay.
around your neck, little handkerchief things.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
in a lot of it is, it just seems cheesy to outside people, like it doesn't make sense, right? But what you do is you set goals, and you go into the forest with a bunch of people who do this ritual thing off of a
Yeah,
script that who knows how many iterations it's been. And you set a goal, but you're sitting there in a forest at one point in time, and
yeah.
and they leave you alone. I don't want to give away all the secrets.
Sure, sure, sure.
and,
Yeah.
and you just look up, and you see the trees, and you hear the wind, and you realize, like, how special this world
Yeah.
is. And I in particular, I think this is someone else's story, but I remember this story they told me, where they were with kids on that experience, and the kid goes, like, wait, what's that? What the heck is that? And he goes, like, son, that's the wind. And
Right.
and he hadn't heard the wind,
Unbelievable.
blowing through the trees like that before, as a city kid. There's cool stuff like
I
that,
love that.
that
Did you were you at all reticent? What's that? Reticent about doing that sort of thing? Did that stuff come naturally to you to go into the woods and be with nature, or?
I mean, I think I think so. I'm not like the hippie type of person who, like, takes off his shoes and walks in
Sure.
the meadow, or
Yeah.
and I fall back into bad habits. I get on my phone, and I'm just on Twitter, and I
Yeah.
become this 21st century monster. I feel like, over time, of slouching over,
Yeah.
and just being on technology and dealing with trolls,
Yeah.
but I know there's something good in this. And I just talked to Peps McRae about
Right.
his habits. You should ever want to
Um.
talk to someone how to,
Oh,
like, live a life, you should
I
talk to
could
Peps
imagine.
McRae.
Yeah.
And he has all these atomic habit type things,
Yeah.
and that's what we talked about most, was, like, he lives in Brighton, and it's a city, which I didn't know. I thought it was a
Yeah.
nice
Seems like.
little beach town, and no,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah. Yeah.
city. And we walk through the concrete jungle, and we don't get the experience of the trees and of the nature. And the more I push myself to do that, it's like going to the gym in the best way possible. So
Exactly.
I have to do that more. I have to put that in my life, as I sit
Yeah.
on this computer, and as I go to strip malls and McDonald's in parts of this country to do my song and dance presentations. So
Yeah. 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 Because I think I've definitely, I've been on a journey for the last 20 years of having to push myself out of my comfort zone, but being almost 100% rewarded every time I do. Do you know? And every time I'm a bit like, oh, I mean, the most recent one was someone was saying to me in a session, Chris, tell me how you're showing up today. And I was instantly like cringy, like, oh, and they
yeah.
said, we're gonna write down how we're gonna show up. And I was, again, like, oh God, this is a bit too emotional. But I did it anyway, lent in, and what came out was some of the purest thinking I've done in a long time. And then I was like, you know what? That's another example of where I didn't want to do something. I lent in, and there was a positive benefit.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough, because as a classroom teacher, I'm always thinking that way, and as a presenter, right?
Yeah,
You have an audience of people that, if these things can backfire, right? And often it's because of how the light abuse that these teachers have received from other presenters, right? I went to one where, as a teacher, where this health bureaucrat from the central offices came in and said, yeah, basically, you were all ill, we're all
right.
sick, right? And we're sitting there going, speak for yourself. I'm fine, honey, right? And finally, now let's do some meditation, let's do some yoga stuff. And I'm just going, we've got kids who can't read. We have kids who can't read, and stuff like that. Like, who knows where the balance is? But certainly a personal reflection, or matching up with people in your building who they're just on a different space of thinking, and maybe partnering with them. These
Yeah,
are things that have helped me. And of course, just going to the gym, getting out in the woods.
yeah,
Uh, not ending the day every day like needing to snack, needing to
Right.
watch junk
Yeah,
TV,
yeah, yeah,
needing to have a glass of wine, like just maybe it's just talking to your partner and
yeah.
doing some yoga,
That's cool. Yeah, wicked. Well, let's crack on. We're going to go on to a second kind of launch pad here, and you won't be surprised. Oh no, we're not. We're going to talk about the next ignition point actually. So, this is a second element, I guess, something that's happened to you in your life that again is kind of driven some sort of transformation. So, can you think of another, event maybe, and how you were before it, what the event was, and then, how you think it's kind of changed you?
Yeah, I made the decision. It probably is more European than American, I'm sure. Like the Erasmus experience.
Sure.
You're in college and you go out and you go live somewhere else. Go get your backpack and I did that at 17 when I was, going to be in my what we'd say junior year of high school.
Yeah.
I found a thing that would let me do it, and I went to France, and I lived in France during that year. And it was transformational. I went into it not knowing much about French or French
Yeah.
culture, and I didn't I didn't know. I don't I realized a lot. There were a lot of lessons in that year. One is that you just can't pick up a language by just being there and
Right.
hoping you absorb it like a child,
Yeah.
like a baby would. It took me about 2 months of realizing I speak the language that everyone else in the world is learning. And
Right.
if I want to ever learn French, I have to pretend I'm from Lithuania or something, or I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
tell everybody I only speak French. And I have to spend every night doing a little extra work because you don't learn from conversations and immersion as much as you think. You learn from freaking flashcards and your notebook and just orally practicing and rehearsing and reciting words. And when I looked around at my other American and British and Australian counterparts, I realized I wasn't making any progress at the beginning. And then when I made that decision to focus fully on learning this language, or I will never come back and show my face in America,
Yeah.
that I was able to quickly accelerate beyond everybody else
Wow.
by my own effort, by pure memorization of this
Yeah.
entire language. And yeah, I mean, I also kind of like the summer camp thing. I also found out that I'm living in someone's house, a French person's house with a different culture, and I'm people, it's really difficult to live with people. It's
Yeah.
difficult to, as a teenager, you don't know the social cues, and you don't know how to be, it's hard for everyone, but especially when you're not even of age yet.
Yeah.
I remember I bought a watch because I was kept being late to stuff. I
Okay.
bought a watch, and during the first evening, I just kept looking at my nice watch. I just kept looking at my nice watch, and the dad just like puts down his cutlery, and was like, you know, do you want to be here or do you not want to be here? You keep looking
Right.
at your
Right. Right.
darn watch, right? And
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I just love
Listen,
the
that's
look at
my
my
watch.
watch. Things like that where you're like,
Yeah.
you deal with social things, you deal with the language, you deal with not being
Yeah.
with your parents. These were like, that was a good year that still to this day, I think has shaped me
Formative.
into who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you, I mean, do you recognize? I mean, it's coming through pretty strongly to me, and whether you recognize that a theme going through what you've been talking about today is putting yourself in uncomfortable situations.
Yeah, I mean, something about exposure therapy, maybe it's why I roll my eyes a lot of people that are like, "Oh, time tests cause anxiety, testing causes anxiety. Everything makes kids anxious today." And I I admit that I myself I made the choice. I
Yeah.
consented to do a lot of things that were difficult, and I still today, right? It is my choice that I work 70 hours a week, and that I never stop and I never sleep, and that's not other people's choice. I appreciate that. But the idea, like there was a newspaper article went viral the other day where like schools are now like, if you have an anxious child, we have a 1 day program for them, or
Right.
that we, that school cannot be academic because kids are ill, kids are ruined, and we need to meet them where they are, which means getting rid of all these beautiful topics and content in order to just chat with them, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I find all of that to to be very dangerous and a sort of
Yeah.
slippery slope, because
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not a what doesn't kill you make you stronger sort of Darwinian type
No.
of
No.
person.
No.
I'm not that, but I do believe that like effort and doing things that are hard, that these are part of a childhood, and I'm not doing it just because the adult world is so scary and they're preparing you. I'm doing it because it's the means to a fulfilling and wonderful life where you get to choose. After that, you get the agency to
Yeah.
pick your destiny. And we're robbing kids of that when we take away those experiences.
Tricky, isn't it? And of course, there's something around, the growth is in the hardship, you know, that's where it is, and yeah, God, we could go on about it all day, I'm sure. So let's do what I said we were going to do before, and let's visit this second this launch pad. And again, it's communication based naturally because of Zach's kind of field of expertise. And when I wrote this one, I it was a fairly uncomfortable reflection for me because I was reading about this idea that there's a fine line between constructive communication and then destructive communication. And the idea was that, we should all be kind of careful that in our efforts to be supportive, and communicate in a supportive way, that we don't take that too far and then slip into what might be a damaging way of communicating. And when I started doing a bit of research on it, different kind of positive ways of communicating came up. And when we look at this list now, if you're watching this, on a video, this idea that you may, with all the best intentions, be going into advise someone, to advocate for something, to articulate an idea, to challenge someone, maybe to critique or diagnose or direct or inquire or probe. But there's a danger that advice turns into patronization, that instead of advocating, you be seen as someone who's preaching. Articulation turns into this kind of verboseness. Challenge feels like an attack. Critique feels like a criticism. Diagnosis then goes too far and feels like you're overanalyzing someone or something. That you're thinking, oh, I'm going to be direct here, is taken as a dictatorship sort of thing. Inquiry turns into interrogation, and then probing goes too far and feels a bit intrusive. And so I started playing around with that in my head around, okay, well, what would be the guidance? And so I thought this idea that where we can, we should be as purposeful as we can with our communications, so to think about maybe if it's a planned conversation, what type of approach do I want to take? And to not leave it to chance that I might pick the right one, for instance. There's something about being reflective and, this idea of reflecting during the conversation so that you could make fine tweaks and probably afterwards to think, did that go the way I wanted it to go? Something about responsive, which links, I guess, to reflective, that if you catch yourself moving into a destructive communication style, then you've got the kind of the awareness and the management to step back out of that. And then the last one was, I think this is a key one for leaders, this idea that there's a consistency around the way you communicate so that people know where they are with you at any point and don't feel any kind of heightened level of anxiety about coming to you and talking. But what resonates in there with you, Zach?
Yeah. Well, I actually interpreted this. It was great. You described it from the I think very much the higher leadership standpoint, the principal
Sure.
or the head of school. I interpreted this around instructional coaching,
Nice.
which has a different set of conditions, right?
Yeah.
As an instructional coach, here we have a lot in America. We have a lot of full-time instructional coaches, so that's their only job. It's the only thing is to help teachers be better teachers, but they're not their line managers. They're not their evaluators, in many cases they're colleagues. They might be in the same, they're in the same union, right? They're in the same they go to the same meetings. They have, right? And so they're partners.
Right.
However, uh I believe that it's a missed opportunity if this partnership is purely facilitative. It's feel
Sure.
purely just a co-construction,
Yeah.
where really that's actually not even a co-construction. It's you construct and I will listen.
Yeah.
I call that the therapist.
Right.
They're just listening, and
Yeah.
the teacher's going off on, I wish this and that, and the coach gets end up it ends up being cornered in a position where they have to listen to things they don't want to listen to because it has nothing to do with learning,
Yeah.
and they can never be forthcoming with information. They're always withholding information that could just be shared.
Yeah.
And so I go into the model which Josh Goodrich would call responsive coaching,
Uh-huh.
where you do need to give information and you do need to be helpful.
Yeah.
And so this is where this comes into play. Is I'm going to have to advise and advocate and articulate and challenge these people. But the fine line there, it's all well and good to talk about it, but what do you? For me, it's like, what do you do? What's in the script that
Yeah.
stops you from crossing over into
Yeah.
that? I I guess there's two things I would say. One is in the setup for your coaching program with teachers, is
Yeah.
you really need to have the principals and the supervisors explain and describe the rationale behind the coaching program. And
Yeah.
that, maybe other coaching programs, it's a second set of eyes. At this school, it's more than a second set of eyes. They will always be ready to model something for you. They will
Yeah.
always come to you, not with a tip or a trick, but something that they saw in your lesson that could just slightly be tweaked. And as a school, our culture is different than other schools. We take those as opportunities to grow. You may not agree with it, which is when you say, I don't agree with it. And this
Yeah.
person will then talk to you about, okay, is there a better step than the one I selected? Or is this something, just try it and let's see how it works, because we're like scientists in the classroom. Let's take action
Absolutely.
and see if it works or doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
That's the first part, the setup. Schools don't get this right. The principal doesn't care about coaching. The principal doesn't feel connected to coaching. The coach maybe's in this union, the principal's in this union.
Yeah. Yeah.
They don't talk to each other, right?
No.
The That's the setup. The other piece I think is in the script of the language. What I follow very much that step lab script. And one of the things that blew my mind when I memorized it, when I learned it, was after you give some praise around the lesson, you always want to start off on a good note. You also want to give them a prompt of reflection, give them a chance to talk about how it went. Now you're in a good spot already because the teacher has talked, the teacher has shared, the teacher understands, has explored their own problem space. Then
Yeah.
you just go with this. It's not even a question, it's a prompt. You go, tell me about the do now. Or tell me about when you were asking questions and I noticed some things, and immediately, just in tell me about, the teacher will tell you all of these different things. They will
Sure.
problem
Yeah.
solve out loud. Novices may not get that answer right. But anyone else on the continuum of expertise will start explaining things that they could have done better, and then you go, so here's the step I'm here to bring you, which
Yeah.
perfectly fits in with
Mm-hmm.
what you just said. And this isn't like, I'm going to direct you to do this. This isn't, and this also isn't that inquiry, like overly inquisitive piece. It's targeted. It's narrow, and it works very frequently, almost 100% of the time when
Yeah.
you go that way.
I think that's really interesting, and something came to mind. I was talking to someone the other day about coaching, about how this phrase "coaching baggage," that people are carrying with them potentially a fixed idea about coaching or how it should be based on their previous experiences. And I think you're right. It's really important to not only communicate what what the coaching in this setting is going to be like, but unapologetically pick a way of doing it. and just say, look, this is what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. If you've got other mental models of coaching, then yeah, that's not what we're doing here.
That's not what we're doing here. And I find, not to say like any school could pick a different model that I just said. Of course you can. But think of the drawbacks of not being a more so-called directive or responsive coach, which is that it's every discussion with every teacher now is in that gray area of,
Yeah,
do I listen, do I tell, do I prompt, do I, and it's a little bit like, is my silent reading time going to be silent, or
yeah,
is it going to be up to interpretation of what
yeah,
silent means, right?
yeah,
I feel that way with the most popular types of coaching models out there, is that it's so much it's so vague and woolly and up to interpretation that
yeah,
everybody's going to do it differently, and you're going to get worse results. You're going to get the pushback. You're going to,
yeah.
because it's not clear what this is. When we
No.
know exactly what it is, which is only, like, again, silent or not silent. In this
Yeah,
case, it is the coach is going to coach, right?
yeah,
Once you
yeah,
are
yeah,
very clear about that, then there's a lot less opportunities, I feel,
yeah,
fewer opportunities to have those sort of clashes with teachers, because they know
yeah.
what this school's all about.
Well, exactly, yeah. And and we haven't talked about kind of PhD foci, but mine was on self-efficacy, so sort of task-specific confidence. And we find quite often that although it may seem like a nice thing to say, like, oh, there's no one way of coaching, or there's no one way of teaching, from a self-efficacy point of view, that just creates anxiety, because you're making it so mystical that it's almost unachievable. And I'm not sure that's helpful when you're training coaches.
And that's why they leave, right? I mean, there's a stepping stone effect, I think, where people use coaching to get into so-called higher roles, right?
Right.
People want roles sometimes they're not fit for too. They're pursuing a dream of like being being perceived as an expert, and they end up going into things that they're not equipped to do, and so on. But people kind of use coaching here as that first step into the next thing, and
Yeah.
they leave immediately. But I often find that they do that without ever having felt a sense of accomplishment or success. They didn't memorize the script, and
No.
if they had, maybe we would keep great teachers in instruction, in
Yeah.
and around the classrooms,
Yeah. Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
would have way better results from coaching if we didn't make it vague and it's up to you, discover how to do this, figure it
Yeah. Yeah.
out,
Yeah.
because bring your relationship building to the teachers. What does that mean, right? Why do you assume I don't already have that? You know what I mean? And that sort of thing, right? And I find that we could fix coaching pretty quickly if we adopted some of these principles I've mentioned.
That's great. Well, we're coming to the end now, and of course, this is an interesting one because the last question you chose is potentially one of the most vulnerable ones, and so it'd be interested to see why you chose this one. So, Zach chose his final kind of fast friends question is this: when did you last cry in front of another person? Tell us more about that.
I had I hadn't cried, I think, until like I was like from like 8 to 16. I
Okay, no
had
drama.
not,
No.
there wasn't a moment. Who knows, I'm not I don't I do feel embarrassed about it, a little bit. There's a cultural expectation for boys and so on, but I don't know. My mom's not a crier. My dad
No.
my dad probably is. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh
yeah.
uh you know, uh I well, last time specifically was probably just this recording where I just got a little choked up talking about the Annabelle girl. I was just like
Did
this
you?
close. I did, but luckily the internet's good at hiding those things.
Yeah, blurry. Yeah.
Uh, um, I I've noticed a little bit more emotion in these presentations. I've noticed like feeling like I'm being separated from the classroom, and
Okay.
remembering certain students, remembering certain achievements we made, right? Um, I think and just becoming more nostalgic about
Yeah.
things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
These memories that, if you don't think about them enough, they're going
Yeah.
to fade away, and that you're
That's nice.
reconstructing memories
Yeah.
incorrectly. I see some of my older memories in the third person now. I
Right.
see myself as a child talking to my preschool teacher, and I go, that obviously isn't the memory because I
No,
was seeing it through these eyes,
of
and now
course.
I see it as a film, right?
Yeah.
And I think you mean, it's weird. This has been a very touchy feely episode, Chris. Thank you
Absolutely.
for
Well, it's what kind of what
pushing me
kind of
to.
what we want, really. And I think, one of our jobs, I suppose, potentially as role models is to, show that vulnerability. And I think sadly my story is a bit like yours, and it's taken me ages to grow into that and to be comfortable with it. And, I've got, a young son now, and I'm trying, to not avoid him seeing me cry. I mean, I'm very lucky in that, a bit like you really, most of my crying is pride related. When I feel proud of myself or somebody else, that's usually when it comes on. And so when he asks, I'm able to say, well, this is because I'm really proud of that. But yeah, that idea of showing vulnerability is really strong. Well, thank you so much for spending the time. I know it's super early over in the States, and so we're kind of just really finishing off by saying thanks. And in terms of people connecting with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, definitely on social media. You can find me and Google me. Groshell is my last name, so you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn and Blue Sky and so on.
Yeah,
Educationrickshaw.com. We didn't get to talk about Sudan. That could have been a
right.
formative thing, but I
Let's
lived
do
in
let's do
Sudan for
episode 2, man.
I lived in Sudan for 3 years. That's where the rickshaw comes
Of
in,
course.
and it's now become my website and my consulting company. But if you
Great.
go there, there's a contact form, and you can just that's the easiest way to email me is through the contact form.
Right.
Aggressively Incorrect is my podcast,
Yeah.
and it's skyrocketed. According to the estimates, it's in the top 1% of podcasts. So I would
Amazing.
go check it out, and
Yeah.
always having new guests. Richard Mayer of Multimedia
Okay.
Principles has just come on. So
Ooh.
um, otherwise, just check out this book here if you have a
Yeah.
chance, which is Just Tell Them.
Yeah.
I wrote it with probably like you did, Chris. I wrote it with a lot of love, but also being worried about how people would react to it, and hoping it wasn't terrible, and it's done all right. So if you want
Yeah.
to check that out, it's I think it's a
Definitely.
good read.
Well, we'll put all the links to all that stuff kind of in the in the comments section. Again, if you're interested in the in connecting with me online or looking at the Leadership Launchpads book, there's some stuff there. Yeah, get in touch with me, either me or Zach. And yeah, so yeah, well, that's it for today, and we'll see you at the next one.